What's going on, guys? It's Andy. Today I'm going to be taking another look at the Retroid Pocket 2, and we're really just going to be taking a look at the emulation side of this system and how well it handles games, because really that's what we're the most interested in. So without wasting too much of your time, we're just going to jump in. I do have mine set up to boot into the Dig emulator front end by default, and this is also my home launcher. If you're interested in seeing how I set up this emulator front end as well as setting it as my home screen and my launcher, check the description that I've got listed below. I've actually made a video tutorial on how to set this up. So we're gonna skip a couple of these systems just because they're so easy to emulate that really I think it's just kind of a waste of time to see, such as Game Boy and the original Nintendo. So we're just gonna start with a Game Boy Color game here. And we're just gonna scroll through. As a matter of fact, we will just click, I've got a button set to play a random game. And there it is, Wario Land 2 is going to be our random game today for Game Boy Color. And something else to note that I've also mentioned in that Dig tutorial video is that the Dig emulator front end in itself does not contain any software to emulate any games. It's actually just passing the game off to RetroArch, which is really what is emulating the game. So you have to set up both of those things, and again, I show that all of that in that video that I'll have linked. And I may be able to try to keep this in focus for you guys, but if you see there at the top right corner, that's actually our frame counter. So you might be able to keep an eye on that throughout the games and just kind of really be able to get a definitive answer on how well these are running. Of course, with Game Boy Color, we're not expecting any issues. And the other thing with this Dig emulator front end and RetroArch specifically is that you also are able to set up hotkeys. One of the hotkeys I have set up is fast forward. So if I hold select, which is my hotkey enable, and then whatever respective buttons do any task. So if I hold select and then hold R2 or ZR in this case, it's actually just going to fast forward for us. So this will help kind of skip through some of this stuff. We can also, that's the system running at just over half volume. So if you can kind of hear what that sounds like. Okay, it looks like we're finally getting into some gameplay. Trying to get this in focus for you again. And I have heard a few people say that they've had issues with button latency or input lag. I have not personally noticed that myself. It could just be a matter of the core that they're using. And specifically, they mentioned the Super Nintendo. They had more significant issues with button latency, and I myself have played a fair bit of SNES on this system and have not had any issues with input lag. So it's going to be kind of hard to tell in the video, but if that kind of tells you anything, I really haven't had any issues. And the buttons all feel really good. It's very comfortable hold for long play sessions, you know. And then with those hotkeys, I also have a way to close the game and return to Dig, which is going to be hold select and press B. And that's going to boot us back to our Dig emulator front end, which again is set as my actual launcher. Let's try one more Game Boy Color game. Let's try this Hot Wheels. Sounds good to me. And again, we're still running at a pretty constant 60 frames per second, actually just a hair over, but that's 100% full speed. Okay. Now let's go ahead and move over to something a little bit newer. We're going to keep it in the Game Boy vein, but we're going to move over to Game Boy Advance now. Again, just select a random game. We'll try Pocket Dog, sure. And Game Boy Advance typically is a little more difficult to emulate, obviously just because it's a little bit newer. And with the Game Boy Advance, they also implemented a lot more 3D style games, so they're just a little more difficult to emulate. I've not noticed really any issues. I've had in a couple of games just really minor stuttering or very minor frame drops. Okay, I can already tell that game is going to take a little too long to get into, so we'll just skip that one. Let's try something maybe people are a little more familiar with. And this one actually is going to be a perfect one because this is more on the 3D side as far as Game Boy Advance goes. And again, keep an eye on that frame count up there at the top right. So this is not actually a very good example of a Game Boy Advance game running on this system, which is a little disappointing. So right now we're running at about 43 frames per second, and we have an incredible amount of audio distortion, which very much surprises me, as this is a game that I have specifically played on my LDK, which is significantly weaker hardware, and I've had no issues with really any GBA. I think if we played around a little bit with some frame skip, that would probably help, but again, I'm just taking a look at the capabilities of the device and emulating different systems. Let's try one more Game Boy Advance game and see if it can redeem itself. And again, at this point, I do not have any frame skip enabled, and I'm pretty certain that would make a pretty big difference. I'm not sure how much it would help with the audio tearing, but okay, so this is going to be obviously a very simple game to emulate, so I don't think we'd have any issues with this one. I also have no clue how to play this game. Never played it before in my life. But we're running at a steady 60 frames, just over actually. So now we'll go ahead and close this. So with Game Boy Advance, you've seen that at least just in the 3 games that I did play, it's already a little hit or miss, which is pretty disappointing. Now we'll go ahead and jump into something a little newer than that. We'll go ahead and try Nintendo 64. Now Nintendo 64, based on my experience, the cores on RetroArch are not quite as good as a standalone application for Nintendo 64, so the emulator we're actually going to be launching these games in is Mupen 64. And we'll just try one very simple. We'll just try Mario Kart 64. And we should also have a frame counter in the top right on this one as well, if I remember correctly. Okay, and we've actually got a save state going here, so that's good. Okay, so the frame counter is up in the middle on this, and this game on original hardware was 30 frames per second. It might have actually even been 25, but 25 is very playable, and this is about the same performance I've seen with most N64 games. A couple of them kind of, you may notice a little bit of slowdown in cutscenes for some reason a little more often. You can see now we're dropping down. We just hit a low of about 13 frames. And it really just depends on what you're playing and what's going on the screen. And once again, this is without any frame skip or any tweaking of the settings whatsoever. So this is just what you would expect if you set up an emulator and downloaded the games and tried them. That's exactly what you're looking at here. But by and large, the time I've spent with Nintendo 64 on this system, I would say it's playable. Every once in a while, like you just saw, there is a bit of a slowdown. But all in all, it's really not bad. Okay, we'll call that good. Let's try just one more N64 game here. Something that's going to be easy to get into. Let's just try Super Mario 64. And this is one that I actually haven't even tried on this system, so I'm interested to see how it does. Okay, so we've started at a 30 frames for the main menu, which is a pretty good sign. And by default, Mupen 64, which is pre-installed on this device, the default keys, you're just gonna have the analog stick, the D-pad. The right stick is gonna function as your C buttons. B and Y are A and B, respectively, so A and B, just like the setup of a Nintendo 64 controller. I don't believe X and A do anything. Then you've got L and R, and then ZR is gonna be your Z button, or Z trigger on a N64 controller. Okay, so far so good. Yeah, and we're still running at a 30 frames right now, which is a good sign. Hit a little bit of a drop, but I didn't actually notice the game slow down any. And we've got the C buttons, as I mentioned, are going to be the right analog stick. Yeah, I would say that's pretty playable. Okay, we'll call that good on N64. We'll try a bit of Nintendo DS. I haven't done a lot of setup on the DS emulator, which I use Drastic. It's just going to be the most reliable for really any Android platform, but especially with this low-end hardware, it's just going to be the easiest. So we'll go ahead and try Rayman DS, boot that up, and it should go ahead and load us into Drastic and boot the game, and it has. It's going to be kind of tough to see. I actually haven't changed the screen layout just yet. I can go ahead and do that really quick. So if you press and hold the home button on this, and I actually find that I use it quite often, it'll bring up a cursor that you can control with your left analog stick. And we can go ahead and swap the screens. There we go. Okay. Okay, let's just go ahead and load. So we don't have a frame counter, but I think with this game it should be pretty easy to tell. Thought there was a way to skip this video. I'll let you hear the sound a little bit and I'll quit talking for just a second. And our battery's running low. Got my cursor enabled, that's the problem. Alright, let's go ahead and try some Mega Drive or Sega Genesis. And of course we're going to try a Sonic game. Those are historically a little more on the difficult side to emulate just because they're so fast-paced. It's going to be an easy way to tell if there's any screen tearing on the system. Alright, so we are in the O's. Keep going. Okay, here's the S's. We're just looking for Sonic the Hedgehog. Here we go. And this is another system that's going to be emulated using a RetroArch core. Turn that down just a hair. Right now we're at 61 frames. Now it's dropped down to 60, which is about right. Not actually sure. There we go, okay. Apparently this button by default is pause, which is a little strange, but it also seems to be doing some funny stuff. Yeah, I can't say that's a good sign. And if I'm being honest, this has more or less been my experience with this device. I seem to find it is a little more frustrating more often than it's not frustrating, which is quite disappointing, but that is my opinion. Okay, so maybe we'll call it good on Genesis. Try some Super Nintendo real quick. Let's just try a random game. Super Metroid. So we should be able to fast forward this. Yep, no way to skip. And I am hearing a bit of crackling on the speakers. Forgotten how long it takes to get into this game. Alright, here we go. So again, that input latency that some people have mentioned, I haven't noticed it. And specifically in Super Nintendo that they mentioned, I've not had any issues, and we're running at a constant 60 frames again, which is even more than can be said for the GBA. Okay, so there's a little bit of Super Nintendo. And now we'll jump into the systems that I've really noticed most issues with, one being PlayStation. So the issue I've had with PlayStation, I'll go ahead and show it to you here. So we'll jump into Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. And this is utilizing another RetroArch core. So the issue I've had with emulating PlayStation on this device is that pretty much every game I've tried has maintained a constant 60 frames per second or full speed. The games that work really well. And again, we're still right at 60 frames. But if we close this game and we try another game, which on this list, I would say only probably about 2 to 5% of these games are actually playable, at least with whatever setup I have right now. I've had a lot of issues. So specifically, if we try Rayman 2, we'll let that load up. And again, it's using the same core through RetroArch, right at 60 frames, but we have no input. And this seems to just vary from game to game. The best I can think is that it's relying on, or it's looking at the games, whether they utilize analog sticks or not. And the games that don't require analog sticks seem to work, and the analog stick just works as basically a second D-pad, whereas games that do require the analog sticks do not seem to function at all. So if you... And I actually seem to have gotten through that somehow. It's just a demo. No, I didn't get through it. So if you know a fix for that, please let me know. But that's the issue I've run into with PlayStation 1. Now jumping over to Dreamcast. And I have heard there are fixes for Dreamcast, and I haven't actually consolidated these games yet. I have heard there are fixes for Dreamcast, but based on my experience, and I have tried a few more games than this, but with this game specifically, and it's kind of hit or miss all over Dreamcast, with this game specifically, you'll notice about a 50% decrease in the frames. So you can already hear a lot of distortion in the audio. You can see we're running at 26 frames per second rather than 60. Something nice that can be said for it is that the input works. But again, we've got some pretty significant audio issues. So right now we're running at 41 frames, which would be manageable if we were actually playing the game, but we're not even doing that yet. So now we've hit the actual game. We're running at 19 frames with just this god-awful audio. So this is not playable. So we'll go ahead and go home. And one other thing that I wanted to show you guys that I think is actually pretty cool, and otherwise, you know, for an otherwise irredeemable system, in my opinion, this is kind of a silver lining. So we've also got access to Android games, and this is going to be completely hit or miss. That goes without saying, especially since we're running Android 6.0 at this time on the Retroid Pocket 2, and a lot of games are going to be optimized for newer Android versions. Stardew Valley is a game, however, that I have played around with, and while the performance is not perfect, it is near perfect, and it is absolutely playable. So we'll go ahead and just restore our save point. And in the start screen, for some reason, the buttons don't seem to work very well. It's just kind of expecting you to have a touch screen. So if you just use that cursor and get through the start screen, the game itself actually does allow you to use the face buttons. So we're loaded in. Of course, we're not going to have a frame counter on this, and you will notice every so often there is a bit of a stutter or a frame drop. But again, it's such a slow-paced game that it's really not all that important. Maybe when you get into the dungeons or the mines, it might be an issue every once in a while. But again, it's pretty playable, all things considered. And this was downloaded directly from the Play Store. I believe the game was $4.99 or $9.99 or something. I don't remember exactly the cost of Stardew Valley on the Play Store. But again, I mean, it's very playable. So that's Stardew Valley on the Retroid Pocket 2. And again, in summary, I'm going to go ahead and put this to sleep before it dies. To summarize, again, I've had this system for nearly a month now, and I will be doing another in-depth review on the device at the 1 month mark, just, you know, having spent all this time with it. As of right now, even setting up the Dig emulator front end, even, you know, optimizing some of the performance settings in the Android system settings, I still just do not love this thing. I barely even like it. I want to love it, and it's got all the promise there. It feels great, it looks great. But the system being so slow and so unreliable is what just really, you know, kind of breaks the whole thing for me. And it's you know, you just, I almost find myself having to force myself to pick it up and use it because it's just not something that I enjoy much. But anyways, guys, I hope you did enjoy this video. Hopefully I answered some questions for you. If you have any questions or any comments, please leave them down below. I'd be happy to get in touch with everybody. If you like the video, like it, subscribe if you want to support my channel. Click the bell notification if you want to get notifications when I upload a new video. And I hope you guys have a good day. I appreciate it.